Hi, I'm Kamya, and I spoke to Advocate Prasanna S about the implications of the WorldCoin project. For those who may not know, WorldCoin is a cryptocurrency project created by Sam Altman, the founder and CEO of OpenAI. One of the questions associated with this project was that it collects biometric information, which has a lot of privacy implications, and also resembles the Aadhaar project in India to make sense of whether it is legal for a private company to store people's biometric information. I asked Prasanna the following questions. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to know about was, at least based on the regime we have right now, before we see actual rules coming out of the data protection bill, what what do private companies or what does anybody really need to do when collecting biometric data? What are the rules and regulations they need to follow?
Right. In terms of what rules and regulations they may need to follow, right? So there's now going to be the Data Protection Act is now an act, right? There is certainly going to be an impact of that over what can be done with this, right? It is biometric data thus far has been classified to be sensitive personal data. That if you have to collect it, but till the time there is a certain optionality associated with it, right? Many of the problems that we had with Aadhaar not going to particularly afflict the WorldCoin project till the time there is effective optionalities. For example, the argument is used is, you don't want it, you don't take it, but you want it, then you need to do this, right? Because the design of the service is such that unless you give this, we cannot ensure uniqueness, right? The design of the service is linked to the exercise of databasing itself.
Okay.
Right? How is this different from Aadhaar? Right? So I'm not as much worried about this as much as I was with Aadhaar, because Aadhaar was building a general purpose database, right? So in Aadhaar's case, what it was that you will build this database, then we'll figure out the use cases, right? So that is a fundamental violation of our privacy principle.
Okay.
When there is a certain level of tolerance for both personal data collection and its usage and its storage, and perhaps storage in the form of a database, a central database, right? There's a certain level of tolerance when that collection or use or storage is intrinsically and fundamentally linked to the service that you're providing itself. In Aadhaar's case, they said the purpose itself was the database, right? So therefore, the kind of problems that afflicted Aadhaar is different. Here, on the other hand, there are going to be different kinds of problems. That's why I'm not saying, so see, although it appears that you see a private company looking to create an Aadhaar-like database, the parallels end there. The kind of problems with a state-created general purpose database is different from a specific purpose database created by a private corporation. In the case of private corporation, now, although we have the Data Protection Act, we know the safeguards there are not anywhere near the ideal that we want. The problem with this is that traditionally, we've been successful in building accountability structures for the state. Even when the state attempts as outrageous a project as Aadhaar, it doesn't concern us as much, mainly because we know that the state is still on our leash. Right? There are accountability structures in terms of judicial review, in terms of it's the shape of the beast that we very well know, right? But when a private corporation does this, right, the regulatory regime is generally very superficial.
Right, that's what I was going to ask you next as well. So the
Right.
question was
We are
how
still figuring out. We are still
Yeah.
figuring out. It's not just a privacy related concern, or it is not merely in this domain, but in general, when work of private companies impact fundamental rights or human rights of users or citizens at large, what is the accountability, right? So we had a certain time in history where it was about consumer rights, and then a certain time in history where it was about environment rights, because those were during the time a certain sort of increased vigilance about pollution, and later about green energy, all of that, right? So if you can, they're not necessarily distinct eras. What I'm saying, how have we tried to make these private companies accountable? There was a consumer rights framework. Then perhaps there was this environmentalism framework, right? Their data protection, until the time GDPR was there, data protection was a certain other framework that was there, right? In fact, it borrowed ideas from both consumer rights as well as environment rights, right? Neither of them have been as adequate or as commensurate with the kind of philosophical, I would say, the strength on which the accountability of the state had been built, which is why many of these frameworks have been found wanting. I know I know speaking too much in the abstract, but that's why I don't particularly buy into this as a, WorldCoin is creating another parallel Aadhaar. And the parallel stops with creating a biometric database. There are still significant differences. Aadhaar was a general purpose database. WorldCoin still, at least at this point, still says it's going to be specific purpose.
Right.
So therefore, there's a certain critical departure between the two. But
Okay,
the larger concern is that we don't know the shape of the beast, and we don't have accountability mechanisms that are
exactly. So the next thing I wanted to know from you was, so right now, the way I understood what you were saying, and based on what I've read earlier, uh, this is a collection of data for a specific purpose, and that, based on what I understand, is legal. So, but does the law draw a line based on what purposes data can be collected for, specifically biometric data?
Wait, what? So what is it that biometric data can be collected? See, that is really haggling over price a little bit. You see, now you've ceded the territory that you can collect some personal data for these specific purposes. Then can you do biometric? And if you are collecting biometric, so what are the kinds of services that you can provide? When can you not collect biometric, right? So those are extremely detailed nitty-gritty questions. These are actually more policy questions rather than law questions, right? The law is perhaps not going to engage with it at that level, right? That's why I'm at a loss, right? So, for example, biometric is collected even now for unlocking your phones. Should you allow biometrics to be collected for that, right? So, but there's an argument saying, no, there is no central database that's being created, right? So therefore you are not controlling collection, but you are only controlling storage or use, right? So at what level do you need to control that? I think it's getting into a level of detail that first of all I've not thought about, or not comfortable with it. I don't think it's at that stage, really, right? Well, unless there is significant harm that we can demonstrate, literature that we can demonstrate saying with this private central biometric database, you see, so many things have happened. Is going to be very difficult to move on a policy direction that says that you should not do this. Right? Even nuclear disarmament. For that moment, you still had to have Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? If you have to do that kind of a disarmament movement for our privacy, right? I certainly wish we get sooner there, right? We borrow terminology from the disarmament where we actually say that these things you should not do, right? In fact, all the policy wonks usually don't get that extreme at all, right? So they in fact, disarmament is the only exception anywhere else, right? So, but I don't think we are there. We will not get there anytime soon.
Okay, so another thing, how long can a company hold on to the data that is collected, like a private company or even the government for that matter? Long can they hold on to this data?
See, how long can they, should they, can they? I think there will be now rules, data retention rules that will be under the Data Protection Act that will come, all of that. So they'll say they'll adhere to it.
But so far, do we have any regulation for that? Do we have any specific rules?
No, so they will need to publish a policy that says what is the extent of retention, and they will need to stick to it. That's all there is. It's now self-regulated, right? So reasonable security practices under 43A of the Information Technology Act is what controls now. Data Protection Act is an act, but I don't think it is in force yet. It's not been brought to force. So until then, the 43A regime will stand, and there they will need to publish their policy, their detention policy, and stick to it. And the 43A under that, the biometric is also sensitive personal data, so therefore there are additional safeguards there as well. That they'll need, I wouldn't say additional safeguards, additional provisions that they will need to adhere to.
Okay, just one more thing, to like conclusively get this argument across. So if I ask you, is it legal to create a database like the Aadhaar, that kind of like what WorldCoin is doing? So what would your answer be to that?
If it is, yeah, I mean, if so long as it is optional and the consent is free and informed of people who are giving it, there is nothing in law that stops it, and that's a concern. Which is why we need a robust Data Protection Act, which does not give, which has enough safeguards, right? But at this point, if you were saying that, if you were asking me whether there is law that prohibits it, that I'll have to say that I'm particularly not aware of a law that will prohibit such a thing, particularly if you're collecting data based on prior consent.
So when we talk about consent, do you mean that companies will have to like delete the data or correct the data if the person whose data has been collected asks for that? I mean, even under the current rules, I know the Data Protection Act asks for that, but
yes, even under the regime, they will need to provide that, and at least their policy will need to specify how that correction and erasure can happen.